Warren Buffett has a hiring rule that almost no one talks about. He screens for three things: intelligence, energy, and integrity. But his actual warning is this: if a candidate lacks integrity, he is actively praying they are also stupid and lazy. Because a brilliant, driven person without ethics doesn't underperform. They destroy everything they touch at maximum speed. Most people build their careers on the assumption that intelligence and hard work are the primary engines of success. Study harder, work longer, outperform. That is the conventional formula. Buffett is telling you the formula is incomplete, and that an incomplete formula is not neutral, it is dangerous. Before we go further, if you have found your way to this channel, you are already asking better questions than most. If the pursuit of long-term financial clarity matters to you, consider subscribing and sharing your core investment philosophy in the comments.
This community is built on the compounding effect of mutual intellectual honesty, and your perspective strengthens it. Now, back to the logic. Here is the precise framework Buffett uses. Intelligence is the engine. Energy is the fuel. Integrity is the containment system. Remove the containment system, and you do not simply have a less efficient machine. You have an uncontrolled detonation. In the arithmetic of character, integrity does not add, it multiplies. If your integrity is a positive value, intelligence and energy amplify your output. If your integrity is zero or negative, then no matter how brilliant or tireless you are, the product of the equation is catastrophic. The mathematics are unforgiving. An unintelligent, lazy person without ethics is a manageable problem. Standard organizational structures contain them easily. But a highly capable, relentlessly driven person without an ethical compass?
That individual possesses the specific tools required to dismantle an institution from within, systematically, intelligently, and at full speed. This is not a philosophical abstraction. This is a precise risk management calculation, and Buffett applies it every single time he evaluates a person for a long-term partnership. The question he is asking is not only what can you do, it is what will you do when no one is watching. To understand the full economic weight of character, consider an exercise Buffett has used in graduate business schools. He calls it the classmate exercise. The premise is simple. You are offered a 10% stake in the future lifetime earnings of one of your peers. You must choose one person from your class. Who do you buy? This is not a trivial decision. You are making a long-term economic bet on a human being, one that will compound or decay over an entire lifetime. You have complete information. You know every person in that room.
So who do you choose? Evaluators almost never choose the person with the highest IQ. They do not choose the person with the best grades. They do not choose the person with the most prestigious family connections. They choose the person who is generous, the person who gives credit to others without being asked, the person who is honest under pressure, the person who follows through. In every cohort, across every iteration of this exercise, non-cognitive behavioral traits dominate the selection criteria. Character outbids intelligence every time. And now Buffett adds the second half of the exercise. Who do you short? Who do you bet against? The answer is equally instructive. The short candidates are the individuals who take credit for work they did not do, the ones who cut corners when it is convenient, the ones who are reliable only when someone is watching. Notice something critical here.
The traits that make someone a strong buy and the traits that make them a short have nothing to do with raw ability. They are entirely behavioral. They are choices, Repeated, daily, automatic choices that eventually calcify into character. This is the insight that most people intellectually acknowledge and practically ignore. Integrity is not a genetic inheritance. You are not born with it or without it. It is an active, daily decision. Every morning, you either choose it or you do not. And those choices accumulate. Think about the people you genuinely admire. Not envy, admire. The distinction matters. Now ask yourself, what specifically do they do? Compile that list honestly. Generosity, reliability, accountability, transparency. The willingness to absorb a loss rather than pass it to someone else. Every single quality on that list is volitional. Every one. People decide whether to be generous. They decide whether to keep score or let it go.
They decide whether to operate with transparency or with convenient omission. The failure to adopt these traits is not a failure of circumstance. It is a failure of self-management. This reframes the entire concept of career development. You are not building a resume. You are not accumulating credentials. You are constructing a behavioral architecture, a set of automatic responses that will determine how the people around you value your equity as a human partner. And the market for that equity is more efficient than you think. The people in your professional orbit are running Buffett's exercise on you constantly, without ever naming it. Every time you handle a failure, every time credit is distributed, every time a difficult conversation is needed, they are updating their position, buying or shorting. What Buffett is describing is not idealism. It is not moral philosophy delivered from a comfortable distance. It is a precise, empirical observation about how value accumulates and evaporates in human capital markets. Integrity is the only compounding asset that cannot be replicated, automated, or commoditized away. Here is the actionable deduction. Identify the qualities you most admire in the people you would genuinely invest in. Write them down. Then ask, with absolute honesty, whether those qualities describe your own daily behavior or merely your aspirational self-image. The gap between those two answers is your work. Character is not what you intend. It is what you execute, repeatedly, when the stakes are real and the outcome is uncertain. It is built in the small decisions, not the grand gestures, and it is assessed quietly, continuously, by every person who works alongside you. Intelligence and energy will open the door. They will get you into the room.
But integrity is what determines whether you are invited back, and whether over 20 years the room gets larger or permanently closes. The next question is, what happens when these three forces are fully decoupled in the real world, at scale? History has already answered that, and the answer is not theoretical. Warren Buffett's theorem is not a philosophy. It is a law. And like any law, it has been tested, repeatedly, at the highest levels of business. And every single time, the outcome was the same. You want proof that intelligence without integrity does not merely underperform, it destroys? Enron. Start there. In the late 1990s, Enron was not considered a corrupt company. It was considered a brilliant one. Fortune magazine named it America's most innovative company for 6 consecutive years. Its executives were not ordinary. They held advanced degrees from elite institutions.
They could engineer financial structures that their own auditors struggled to fully map. The energy and intelligence were genuine, undeniable. But there was a structure built underneath all that brilliance. A structure of special-purpose entities, hidden liabilities, and systematically falsified earnings. The intelligence was real. The integrity
was absent, and that combination produced a specific result. In December 2001, Enron filed for bankruptcy. At the time, it was the largest corporate bankruptcy in American history. $63.4 billion in assets gone. Thousands of employees watched their retirement savings dissolve overnight. Pensions they had spent careers building, erased. The destruction did not stop at Enron's walls. Arthur Andersen, one of the most prestigious accounting firms in the world, a firm with over 80 years of history and nearly 30,000 employees in the United States alone, was dissolved.
A single client's ethical failure consumed an entire institution. Congress responded by passing the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, sweeping legislation that fundamentally restructured corporate governance across every public company in America. One firm's missing integrity rewrote the rules for all of them. Enron's collapse at least had a visible structure of financial complexity, instruments that obscured the damage until it was too late to contain. The next case had no such complexity. The deception was simpler, and the harm was more direct. Elizabeth Holmes built Theranos on a promise to revolutionize medical diagnostics. The board she assembled included George Shultz, former Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, former National Security Advisor, David Boies, one of the most powerful attorneys in the country. Influence, prestige, access, all real. Yet how are we?
But the core product, a device supposed to run hundreds of diagnostic tests from a single drop of blood, did not work as claimed. The company kept operating. Patients were receiving medical results from faulty devices. Real people, real health decisions made on false data. Federal fraud convictions followed. The company collapsed. These were not junior employees cutting corners. These were individuals with the social capital and institutional reach to ask hard questions, and did not. What does it mean when the most credentialed people in the room fail the most basic test? Sam Bankman-Fried built FTX into a $32 billion valuation. He was publicly admired, written about in major publications as a new model of business leadership. He spoke at conferences about ethics. He was 30 years old and worth billions. Behind that public image was a structure with no independent board oversight across more than 130 affiliated entities. Customer funds were moved without authorization. Basic accounting controls did not exist. The infrastructure of integrity was simply not there. In November 2022, the $32 billion valuation was erased in a matter of days. Over 100,000 creditors were left entangled in the collapse. Sam Bankman-Fried now faces life in prison. The arc from celebrated genius to total destruction took less than 3 years. 3 companies, 3 different industries, 3 different eras. One identical mechanism: intelligence deployed without integrity. One identical outcome: total systemic ruin at catastrophic scale. Now ask yourself, who suffered most in each of these cases? Not primarily the executives. The Enron employee who worked for 30 years and lost their pension. The patient who made a health decision based on a fraudulent blood test. The small creditor entangled in FTX's collapse with no mechanism of recovery. This is why Buffett's standard is not abstract.
He stated it plainly when he was called in to stabilize Salomon Brothers in 1991, in the middle of one of Wall Street's worst ethical scandals. He told the assembled employees, and he meant every word, "Lose money for the firm, and I will be understanding. Lose a shred of reputation, and I will be ruthless." He was not being dramatic. He was being precise. Money, properly managed, can be recovered. A destroyed reputation cannot be rebuilt by any financial instrument ever invented. This is the asymmetry that most people spend their careers ignoring. Buffett has stated it in the simplest possible terms. It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. 20 years of disciplined choices, compounding daily. 5 minutes of a single ethical failure, erasing the entire ledger.
Before any decision, professional, financial, personal, ask one question. Would I be comfortable if this appeared on the front page of tomorrow's newspaper? Not just the result, the process, the reasoning, the full, unedited truth of what you did and why you did it. If the answer is no, you already know what to do. The historical record is settled. Genius without ethics does not plateau. It detonates. Most people absorb that lesson. They acknowledge the risk. Then they return to the same habits. Knowing what destroys you is not the same as knowing what builds you. That requires understanding something most driven people have dangerously wrong: the nature of passion itself. The history is settled. Intelligence without integrity destroys. But now comes the harder question. How do you actually build something that holds? How do you construct a professional life that compounds instead of collapses? The answer begins with a word almost everyone misunderstands: passion. You have been told to follow it, to find it, to pursue it relentlessly. But the research draws a sharp and consequential line, and which side of that line you stand on determines nearly everything. Self-determination theory identifies 3 core psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. When all 3 are present, work feels meaningful. When they are absent, even the most exciting job becomes a cage. But here is where it fractures. Researchers distinguish between 2 entirely different types of passion: harmonious passion and obsessive passion. They feel identical from the inside. They produce very different outcomes over time. With harmonious passion, you control the work. You choose when to engage. You can step back without anxiety. The work is something you do. It does not define what you are. With obsessive passion, the work controls you. You cannot disengage without guilt. Your sense of identity is fused to your output. The work does not just occupy your time. It occupies your self-worth. Harvard Business School research found something striking. Workers driven by obsessive passion were significantly more likely to endure poor working conditions and below-market compensation. Not because they were disciplined, because they feared the social judgment of being seen as someone who quit. That is not dedication. That is a trap. The highest passion workers are often the most vulnerable to systematic exploitation and to burnout that does not announce itself until it has already done structural damage. The goal, then, is not maximum passion. The goal is the right relationship with your work, one where you bring intensity without surrendering identity, where you can invest fully and still remain the person holding the investment. Now, ask yourself a harder question. What is actually worth that level of investment? Most people, if they are honest, cannot answer cleanly.
They have 20 things they are chasing, and 20 things is the same as 0 things. Warren Buffett identified this problem precisely. He called his solution the 5-25 rule. Write down your top 25 professional goals, then circle the 5 most important. Those 5 become your focus. Your entire energy flows toward them. The remaining 20 are not your secondary priorities. They are not your backup plan.
Buffett called them your avoid at all costs list because they are seductive enough to consume your time, but not important enough to justify the cost. Distraction does not arrive in your life looking like distraction. It arrives looking like opportunity. The 5-25 rule is a filter built specifically to protect you from your own ambition. But focus without feedback is a compass without calibration. Ray Dalio built his entire career on a 5-step loop, documented in his book Principles. Set clear goals.
Identify the obstacles preventing you from reaching them. Diagnose the root cause, not the symptom. Design a plan to remove it. Then execute and repeat. The critical word in that loop is diagnose. Most people treat obstacles as external events. Dalio treats them as data. The obstacle is not the problem. The obstacle reveals the problem. And the person most resistant to that diagnosis is almost always the one whose behavior is generating the obstacle. This is where the auditing tools become essential. Benjamin Franklin, at age 20, designed a 13-virtue system. He selected 13 specific character traits he wished to embody. Then he focused on one virtue per week, 4 full rotations per year. He tracked his performance in a small notebook he carried everywhere. He did not pursue perfection on all 13 simultaneously. He pursued mastery of one, then moved to the next. The discipline was not in the ambition, it was in the constraint.
Character, for Franklin, was not an aspiration. It was a practice with a schedule. Peter Drucker applied the same architecture to professional performance. He observed that the modern knowledge worker now faces a working life of roughly 50 years. That is an extraordinary span of time. It is also an extraordinary opportunity for drift. Drucker's tool was feedback analysis. Before beginning any significant decision or project, write down what you expect the outcome to be. Then, 9 to 12 months later, compare your expectation against the empirical result. Do this repeatedly, and patterns emerge that no amount of self-reflection can substitute for. You learn where your actual strengths lie, not where you assume they lie. You learn which beliefs about your own performance are accurate, and which are comfortable fictions you have been carrying for years without examination.
That gap between the person you believe you are and the person the evidence confirms is where character is either built or avoided. Every action you take is a vote for the person you are becoming. Not a dramatic vote, not a transformative vote. A single, quiet, cumulative vote. Character is not an event. It is an accumulation. A reputation built that way, one daily choice at a time, over 20 years, arrives in the room before you do and holds its value long after you leave. This content is for educational purposes only and does not constitute financial or career advice.